of setting up the recording. Thank you very much for reminding me, because I usually forget anyway. And now that we're recording, now I'm going to announce the sponsors. Okay. I'm sorry?
We're on gallery.
It's not on gallery anymore? Oh, not gallery. Okay, so let's announce the sponsors for this week. 1 second. The sponsor for this week is Dovi Menzelowski, Mr. and Mrs. Dovi Menzelowski, Lil Nishmas Dovi's mother, whose yard site was on Monday, Chaya Bas Reb Chaim Baruch Menzelowski, and his sister Leah Sima Bas Reuben Lowy, whose yard site is tomorrow. Chav Tes Adar Tehei Nishmasim Tzur B'Tzur Chaim. They should be in Militzi Yisharis on the whole family, on Nala Kehillah, and on Klal Yisrael. We also want our learning to be a schus for Shlema for all those amongst us who need a for Shlema, Shimon Yehuda ben Rivka, Yaakov Shmuel ben Chana, and Yisrael Moshe ben Yantegittel, and Shimon ben Chasya, and Elio Shraga Fivish ben Esther. B'tech Shar Chal Yisrael, everyone should have a refuah Shlema. Okay. So yesterday we learned a very interesting halacha. We learned many variations of the same case, and that is someone married one of two women and doesn't know which one of the two women he married. And because of that, there are complications with who could do Yivam and who could do Chalitza and who could he marry. So the question is, we say that none of the brothers could make Yivam because each one might be a Chosek Ukas. Or he can't live with any of these women because these women might be achos ishtai. So the question is, why don't you go to the chazaka? This lady was until now mutter to him. Thank you so much. This lady was until now mutter to him. So now she's mutter to him. So why is it that we don't go basar her chazaka? That's what Rabbi Chana asks. Rabbi Chana says several different svaras as to why we don't say chazaka over here. His first svara is, when do you say chazaka? That's if the chazaka is in that animal, that person, whatever it is. Let's say a cheskas tumah and a cheskas taira. When do you say a person is becheskas taira? That's if there's a question on him if he became tamei, and he has a cheskas taira. So you say the cheskas taira in him overrules the suffix of tumah that occurred within him. Here, the problem is that he might have married this woman's sister. So the thing that's going against the chazaka is not within the woman herself. When here's a question of these two women. One of them he married, one of them is his wife's sister. So when he wants to take in one of these two women, if she's a chos ishtoi, that's not a thing in her, that's a thing in somebody else. Chazaka on this woman will not overrule a suffix that's because of someone else. That's one svara that Rabbi Chanan says. The other svara that Rabbi Chanan says is, we had a very interesting shaila in Chulin, and that is, if there is a suffix shchita, in other words, we're not sure if the person who did the shchita, if he made a mistake. Do you say it's kosher because you have a chazaka that it wasn't an avela, so it's still not a avela, or do you have a chazaka that it's usher to eat from before? Before you ate it, it was Eiver min achai. Before you tried to shecht it, it was Eiver min achai. Now that you shechted it, but if it wasn't a kosher shchita, it could be an avela. So the question in the Gemara was, do you say machsakinan may iser le iser? So Zok Rabbi Chanan over here is, without a doubt, we know for sure this woman changed status. We know something happened that for sure changed her status. And therefore, we cannot say that you go basa chazaka. Because even though you could say the change in status retains that she's mutter, but the fact is we know that there was a change in status. So those are the svaras Rabbi Chanan discusses as to why you don't have over here a cheskes kasher. So the Mishnah was discussing the title of today's shir, by the way, is simply pshat. That is the title of today's shir, because that's what we're going to be discussing. So our whole Mishnah was based on some genius who married one of two sisters and didn't remember who he married. And the Mishnah just builds up complications. What happens if two people did this And how do you deal, if they're deceased, how do you deal with their brothers and how their brothers would deal with the Yibum and the Chalitza? So it was really based on one simple Yosy, but the Gemara, the Mishnah adds cases to build up some more levels of complication. So the last case was Lazesh Naim, Lazesh Naim. They each had two siblings, and let's see the case inside, because the v'chulu of the beginning of the Gemara is very important. So it says over here, Lazesh Naim, Lazesh Naim. Both brothers had not both brothers, both of these geniuses who married one of two sisters, each had two brothers. So the halacha is echav shalzeh choletz la'achas, ve'echav shalzeh choletz la'achas. So there's two sets of brothers. We'll call them set 1 and set 2. In each set, there's an A and a B. So A of set 1 will be choletz, one woman, and A of set 2 will be choletz, the other woman. And then B of set 1 will do yibum to the woman that the guy from set 2 was choletz, and then B from set 2 will do yibum on the woman that the person from set 1 was choletz. Right? That's what the Mishnah passes. What happens if kodmu shnayim v'choltzu? What if set 1, both brothers A and B made chalitza? So then lo yibum shnayim. Set B, set 2, both brothers from set 2 A and B cannot both do yibum. They still have to stick to the same prescription. Is ela echad choletz v'echad miyad. Why is that? Because let's think about it. Let's say the first brother does yibum. This person who he does yibum on might be the sister of the woman who's zakuk yibum, right? There's no problem with the fact that she's zakuk to the other two men because they already both gave her chalitz. But now these two women, one of them is going to be the almana of his brother. The other one will be her sister. So it's a chayis kukasoi. Therefore, he may not do yibum. So therefore, echad chaylos, first one brother does chalitza, and then the second brother will do yibum on the other woman because either she's a stranger, or she's the woman who requires yibum. Kadmu v'chadzu. But what if they didn't follow the rule and they both made yibum? They weren't supposed to make yibum because the first person who makes yibum is suffix being pageya in a chayis kukasoi. But nevertheless, even though he was suffix pageya in a chayis kukasoi, ein maitzin miyadam, we don't force him to divorce his wife. What's done is done already. What's done is done already. So, frek the Gemara, hasu lamalu. What is the chiddush of this last case? We've already discussed all the different options, and we have all the chidushim. We already know that you do have to do chalitza on the first one, and we already know that even if there's one brother who did chalitza on both of them, you could do yibum. So, hainu hak. Zok Gemara, ma'ud tema. Ligzar dilma miyabim beloy chalitza. You might think that we might allow yibum without chalitza if set 1 both brothers did chalitza. You might think that we don't let set 2 do any yibum at all because maybe they'll make yibum without chalitza. Kamash malon, that even in such a case where both brothers in set 1 made chalitza, still one of the brothers in set 2 can still make yibum. Now, for Gemara, another question. This takes us into a little bit of a new realm. Zok to Gemara, my shname haditna. So the Gemara is giving us a full chazara of a case that we had when we discussed the shaila of yesh zika or ein zika, and the Gemara brought a question of arba achim. There were 4 brothers: Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda. Shnayim mehem, Reuven and Shimon, Nesu and Shtei Achayos, are married to 2 sisters. Umesu, Reuven and Shimon died. Umesu hanesu and Es Achayos. So the halach is Hare elu choltos v'lemis Yevamos. Now you have Rachel and Leah that are sisters are falling to yibum to Levi and Yehuda. Levi and Yehuda cannot do yibum on either one of these women. Why? Because each one is a chois kukasa. So therefore, the only option is to make chalitza on both Rachel and Leah. Because as soon as they fall to yibum, they're both considered a chois kukasa. They both remain aser, and therefore yibum is not allowed. And the Gemara wanted to bring a raya from there, and the fact that it says it must be that yesh zika, and that's why they're not allowed. Because if you hold ein zika, then there's no problem of a chaytz kukasa. Let one do yibam on one, and let one do yibam on the other. Right? That's what the Gemara asked at that point. And the Gemara answered, the reason why we don't allow it, even if you hold ein zika, the reason why you don't allow them both to make yibam, because let's say Levi makes yibam on Rachel, and then Yehuda dies. Now Leah, no one's going to do chalitza or yibam to her, because Yehuda's not around; he just died. Levi cannot do chalitza or yibam to this woman because Levi's married to her sister. So therefore, we don't want to be mevatel mitzvahs yevamim. We want each woman to at least have a shot at chalitza. Therefore, we make the first brother at the least do chalitza. And if the first brother does chalitza, then even if the second brother dies, the first brother could now do chalitza on the second woman as well. So because also levatel mitzvahs yevamim, we can't let them both do you. You could. On the second one, you could. So we have two explanations for this brisa. We have an explanation based on if you hold yesika, and we have an explanation based on if you hold ein zika. Now, the Mishnah there says, what if both brothers did yibum? The halach is they have to divorce their wives. So the Gemara's question here is, why is it that in our Mishnah, when there was a suffix of a chaytz kukasai, we said if he married her, ein moitziin, and why there do we say moitziin? That's the Gemara's question. Zok the Gemara, there's no comparison because hachiyasha. Let's look at this more carefully. Hasam, depending on how you learn pshat in that Gemara. Ilamander mer yesika, well then yesika. If you hold yesika, then of course you have to be moitzi because zika means it survives even the death of anybody. It means we'll look at it like you were married to her. So you cannot be married to a woman today who is a chaytz kukasai. How could you be married to this woman? Forever and ever, it's also for you to marry this woman because she is the sister of the woman who is zakok to you. So of course you have to divorce her. So based on that pshat, it's not shver. By us, it's only a suffix if it's a chaytz kukasai, right? And even if it was, let's have a. If he did give up, I'm sorry.
Two brothers.
Indeed, sure, yeah.
Even if the other brothers in the Yevamos are offended, so I think we're still the first one too.
Exactly. So we say it's also forever, just like if she dies, she's still also to the mother-in-law. Right? We look at it like it was a marriage relationship. So it impacts you forever. So, and even if you hold ein zika, and the reason why you weren't allowed to make yibum on both these women is because also the batal mitzvahs yevamim. The problem is, also levatel mitzvahs yevamim. You have that hesed. You have that isser. So as soon as Reuben and Shimon died, right away it was usher for either one to make yibum right away. Why was it usher for either one to make yibum right away? Because of usher levatel mitzvahs yevamim, which is only an isser d'Rabbanan. Zok Rashi, that isser d'Rabbanan now makes it that since you can't do yibum on this woman, now we look at it like she's still a shesach. So therefore, even though you both made yibum now, and the chiyuv for yibum is over, it will still remain usher for you to live with this woman. And that's why there it's matziin. But in our case, kol chad v'chad, Amor didei kamis ramim. Why in each one of us, misafik, it's possible that he is making yibum on the right woman. So therefore, since it's only a suffix that it was a chaytz kukasai, it wasn't a vadai, therefore we don't have a problem. And like we learned on Tosfos, on the top of Omid Beis, on Daf Chav Gimel Beis, the very top Tosfos says that it makes a huge difference if when you first violate, it's a vadai iser, where there we will make you be moitzi, your wife, versus if when you first were over, you were only over a suffix iser. So here, when they were first over, it was only a suffix iser, and therefore we don't make the person get rid of his wife. Kadmu v'kantu ein moitzi. We said if they both made yibum, it was improper, but you don't make them divorce their wives. Tani Sheila says, "Va'afilu shneim kaihan." Even if they're both kaihan, what is the problem? The problem is here there was these two women that were sisters, but one of these women was married to the other guy, and the other guy, both brothers made chalitza. So this woman, even though she's not your achayis kukasoi, but she's still a chalutza. And the problem is, midirabanan, a kohen may not marry a chalutza. Midiraisa, a kohen may not marry a grusha. But midirabanan, a kohen may not marry a chalutza. So if a kohen cannot marry a chalutza, how could we allow the kohen to remain married to a woman who might be a chalutza? One of these two women is a chalutza. Right? One of these two women is his brother's almana. So there's a regular yibamam. But the other woman, we don't know which one of the two it is the chalutza from the other set. So how could a kohen live with a woman if it's just a chalutza? That's the more my time. Chalutza derabbanan. Chalutza is only with derabbanan. The safek chalutza lagazu b'rabbanan. The rabbanan did not say that a woman who's a safek chalutza, he has to be mitzi. So therefore, since he's married to this woman, he shouldn't have married her, but he married this woman, and now she's a safek chalutza. We do not force him to divorce his wife. Correct? The more of a chalutza derabbanan. Are you telling me that a chalutza is only issue derabbanan? But then we have a brayso that seems to learn it out of a pasuk. Gerusha, ainli ala gerusha chalutz minayin tamadam ve'isha. Dr. Gemara, that's not real limud. It's midrabanan. It's only an issue derabbanan ukra asmach kabalmahu. The cross is just supporting the pasuk is just supporting the rabbanan dik iser. In fact, it's only midrabanan. So this kohen is married to a safek chalutza. What is the status of his children? Are his children chalalim because they're ben chalutza, and therefore they could be matama, but they're not allowed to eat truma, or are they considered kohen? So the pashtus we would expect is if he's allowed to be married to her, so then the children are kosher. But the Torah brings down the shita that a safek chalutza will make these children safek ben chalutza, and therefore they have the chumras of being a Yisrael, and they have the chumras of being a kohen. They're not allowed to go into a basic forest, but they're also not allowed to eat truma because they might be pasal kohen. Okay, now we're going to get into the sugya of the Gemara that we're going to call simply pshat. This is a very geshmaka Gemara. Mitzvah begadol liabe. Who is the primary mitzvah? Who has kedima? When it comes to making ibam, it's the oldest brother. V'im kadam hakatam. What if one of the younger brothers did ibam first? Zacha is and of course, then there's going to be the shaila. What if the oldest brother who has the kedima wants to make chalitza, and the younger brother wants to make ibam? Who has kedima? So that'll be tali. If you hold the ikra mitzvahs ibam, so we would probably let the younger brother do. But if you hold the ikra mitzvahs chalitza, then it's not a question. So Tanur about how do we know that mitzvah begadol yabam? So in order to understand it well, I want to pull the pasuk up in Kiseitse, because the Gemara is dashing the pasuk not according to the pasuk. Yeah, there wasn't that. I think Rabbi Ada said because if someone does yibam without the right kavana, it's like being pageh be'erva.
Yosy.
Yes.
How can the ikar mitzvah be chalitza? The whole point of yibum is to have a child.
I think we had a sheet is that since we're choshesh, a person won't do it l'shem shemayim, it will end up being pageh be'erva. But this as far as you're right, you're 100% right about this far. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says, what the pasuk says. It says Kiyeshu. I'm going to just focus on the chumash now. Kiyeshu achim yachta. Two brothers are sitting together. Umeis achad mehen, and one of them, Rachamon L'Tzlan, died. Uvein ein loy. And we learned to vein ein loy, ayin loy, even if he's a mamzer, is still considered a son. Loisia eshes hamesa chuta lishar. This woman, there's a lav on a woman, a Yevama l'shuk. Yevama may not marry another person. Rather, Yevama yava yaleha. The Yevama has to make bia on her. Ulakachalai l'isha v'yibna. And then it says the haya habachar asher teilei. The bachar that's born, Yaakov al shem Akav Ameis, will stand under the name of his brother the Meis. We'll see what that means. So if you read this pasuk, the pashtus is the pashut pshat of the pasuk is the first child that's born from this yibum is Yaakov al shem Akav Ameis. Right? I think we could agree on that. That's the pashut pshat of the pasuk. But the Gemara is not darshaning simply pshat. Hence, the title of the shir is simply pshat. So zog to Gemara, Tanur Rabbanan, v'haya habachar. Mikan, we learn from here, shemitzvah v'gadol liyabim. We darshan, v'haya habachar means that there's a mitzvah for the oldest brother to make the yibum. Asher telei, the pasuk is Asher telei, prat la'aylonis she'einei ledus. A woman who's an islandess who cannot give birth, she does not have a chiyuv to do yibum. Yakim al shem achiv, that means l'nachla. It means l'nachla. Atayim l'nachla. How do you know Yaakov Hashem Achav means that he's going to stand in his brother's place to take over his estate? Maybe it means you name him after his brother. Al Shem Achav. For instance, Yosef Karnaisa Yosef or Yochanan Karnaisa Yochanan. I need to look in Rashi over here because Rashi promotes me. Rashi says, Yosy, Yosy. So Rashi actually makes up the name of the word Yosy. We always know the word Yosy. Where does Yosy come from? Rashi has the word Yosy. Okay, Yosy. So it's good enough. My English teacher used to call me Yosy, so it's good enough. So Zok to Gemara, how do you know that that's not what it means? Zok to Gemara, because the word Yokem al Shem Achiv is defined based on its context in another place. Nemer kan Yokem al Shem Achiv, but Nemer in the Halon, when Yaakov was talking about Menashe and Ephraim, Yaakov said al Shem Achem Yikor b'Nachalosim. Masham, Mashem ha'Amr lahalon. Just like the Shem Ha'achem, when Yaakov was speaking about Menashe and Ephraim, is Nachla, Av Shem Ha'Amr Kan l'Nachla. Below Yimach Shemai, the name of the deceased his name shouldn't be erased. Prat l'Sris Shemai Machi. If this deceased was a Sris, well, his name was already wiped out anyway because he couldn't have children. And then the Mukhi speaks out, that's only if he was born naturally a Sris. But if some physical accident occurred that caused him to become a Sris, his wife would fall even. So we have a couple of interesting things to discuss. The first question is, by Yibam, are you supposed to name the child after the mace? So it's very clear from our Gemara that you don't have to. Yeah, it says first, it's not what it means. But if you look in Parshas Vayeshev, when Yehuda was suggesting that Einan should marry the almana of Or, it says as follows. It says, "Vayom Yehuda la'Einan boy el eshes achicha v'yabe ma'isa v'hakem zera la'achicha." And Rashi says, "V'hakem zera la'achicha haben yikare al shem hameis." So the Chayim ask, the Mizrachi ask, could you chas v'shalom say that Rashi didn't know I'm a Furish Gemara? So the Mizrachi says it's very possible that the parameters of Yibam before Matan Torah were different from the parameters of Yibam after Matan Torah. Before Matan Torah, Yibam was a much looser type of structure. You see, even a father-in-law, any relative was able to do Yibam. So there, if it's any relative, so then you need to give it the name of the father, so it should be Yaakov Shem Aviv. But if it's his own brother doing the Yibam, could be that's why after Matan Torah, where the Yibam is limited only to a brother, you don't have to name the child after the brother. That's one of the.
How would you explain the Rus Yibam?
That's a good question. Rabbi, I was listening to Rabbi Rosner, so he brings up, how does the Rus even work? That wasn't the brother either. So that was after Matan Torah. It was after Matan Torah. So how to explain that? There, they also didn't name the child after the deceased. But again, that's a good child. That's a good child. Okay, so now we're going to get.
Was that a mitzvah for Boaz or was it rishus?
It was this. It must have been a mitzvah.
Why? It was a chiyuv. It was a chiyuv to do it, or it was a rishus to do it.
I'm not sure. It was after Matan Torah, but it wasn't a brother, so I'm not sure how that works.
Maybe that's further enough. Maybe like there was an idea that you could marry your in this kind of a situation to carry it on, but here it's a mitzvah by the brother. Here you have a chiyuv to do it. You need to chalitza. If Boaz hadn't taken her, would he have had to have done chalitza?
No, because he wasn't a brother.
It's not. So it's not.
Well, that case had an extra complication because she was a Mayavi, and there was it wasn't clear if that's included in the Mayavi Lo Yavi Klal Hashem.
That's right. On the wedding invitation, when Boaz married Ruth, there was an asterisk. Ruth Mayavia, and then by the bottom, because I learned Pshat Mayavi Lo Mayavia.
Right.
Okay, so now we're up to a Velt Yisoidis to Gemara. Amar Rava, Af al Gav de B'chal HaTorah Kula Ein Mikra Yotzim Midei Pshutoi. B'chal HaTorah Kula, simply Pshat is the right Pshat. Hacha, in this case by Yibam, Asoi gzeira shava afikte mi pashte lagam, and the gzeira shava was oiker the pashas. So the Rishonim speak out very clearly. Chas v'sholem, don't say that the pshat of the drasha is not pshat. Avada, that's pshat. It doesn't say a mikra ela pshutai. It says a mikra yoytzimidei pshutai, which means that you have to consider the pasha pshat. But that doesn't mean all the other pshatim are pshat. Rabban Katan learns that any drasha is taka pshat. But then there's the pasha pshat, and even though there's many pshatim in a pasuk because of the different drashas of Chazal, but you can't ignore the pasuk pshat. You also have to include the pasuk pshat. Here is an exemption, because here the pasuk pshat is name the child after the mace, and we're saying don't do that. Really, you should say, name the child after the deceased and make the other drashas you come up with nachwa. Here, also Gzera Shava afikte mepashte legamri. The Gzera Shava tells us that don't follow the pasuk pshat. So this is a huge chiddush because it's a one exception in the Torah where you don't follow pasuk pshat. So the kasha is
There's more, and there are more exceptions.
exactly like lifnei iver, mi lifnei iver l'shita mikshra.
Right.
Mi lifnei iver l'shita mikshra is darshan that means two things. It either means giving bad advice, or it means assisting somebody to do an avera, helping someone do an avera. Nowhere in any of the Moanim Mitzvahs of Mincha Chinuch asks this question. Why doesn't any of the Moanim Mitzvahs list off a deraisa to put a stumbling block in front of a person? Don't you say in Mikra Yochim Pshutei? Sure, it can mean all these other things, but what? Why does it not mean putting a stumbling block? That's a big catch of the Mitzvah. It's a good catch, right? So
there are other more ein tachas ayin. You don't do right. That for sure you ignore the simple pshat.
That's right. That's true. So the Kli Yakar, who has actually before the Kli Yakar was before the Chinuch, I think. The Kli Yakar says that the reason why Lifnei Iver L'Shita Mikshal cannot possibly mean putting a stumbling block is, what does it say right after Lifnei Iver L'Shita Mikshal? This v'yareisam lekecha ani Hashem. And we know that whenever the Torah says v'yareisam lekecha ani Hashem, the Isser is something that you can easily deny and camouflage. That's not what I meant. Putting a stumbling block in front of an Iver, you don't need a pasuk of v'yareisam lekecha. That's so obvious that you're doing something wrong. Giving bad advice, you could say, I thought it was good advice. So clearly, Zok the Kli Yakar, that the Isser of Lifnei Iver, its pasuk pshat, has to be referring to something that the person who is being overed can deny that he's being overed, and it's Mesur B'Leiv Ha'adam. That's how the Kli Yakar learns. The Meshech Chochmah learns that Milifnei Iver L'Shita Mikshal is in fact a lav, and he says, where is the Isser to be mazik? We have a whole Masechta Bava Kama about somebody who's mazik. Where do we know that it's also to be mazik somebody? Zokt, the Meshech Chochmah, it's Milifnei Iver L'Shita Mikshal, which is referring to the hezek of bar. Putting a bar, B'Shus HaRabim, is literally putting a mikshal in front of an Iver. I don't know how that explains the other mazikin, but the Meshech Chochmah learns that is the Pashup. Anyway, Zok the Gemara, the Lav Gzera Shava. If it wasn't for the fact that there was a Gzera Shava, would you have thought, Hav Amina Shem Mamish? Are you suggesting that I would have thought it means that you actually name the child after the deceased? That wouldn't make any sense. Because what does the Torah say? The Torah says, the pasuk says, so who is that? Who's the Torah talking? Leman Kamishar Chamana. When the Torah says Yokim al Shem Liyavim, it can't be speaking to the brother-in-law who did the Yibum himself, because then it should have said Yokim al Shem Achicha Mebayim. If the Torah is talking to the person who does Yibum, the Torah should say Yokim al Shem Achicha. Yokim al Shem Achicha means the Torah is talking to a third party. Ila Beidina, and if the Torah is giving instructions to the Bezdin, it should say Yochim al Shem Achi Aviv Miboiled. The child should be named after the brother of the father, which is the deceased. So the question is, what would the pasuk mean, even if the pasuk was trying to say that you have to name the child after the deceased? Maybe the pasuk is instructing the best. The Torah is instructing the best is to do what? Amru Le'Yovim. You, Bezin, should go have a talk with the Yovim and tell the Yovim that Yakim al Shem Achim. Tell the Yovim that he should name this child by the bris. If it's a boy, he should name the child. It has to be a boy. Otherwise, you can't be al Shem Achim. He should name it al Shem Achim. Ella, Asoy Gzer Shabbat. The Gzer Shabbat came along and a fikte legamri and said that it has nothing to do with the name. It's all about the estate. Now that you're saying that when it says V'haya Bechor, it's referring to the person who does the Yibum, and it's stating that the Bechor makes the Yibum, well, maybe it means maybe it means that the mitzvah of Yibum only applies to a Bechor, and the Pashat shouldn't make Yibum at all, right? How do you know to learn how do you know that the Pasuk is telling you that the Bechor is first? Maybe the Pasuk is saying that only a Bechor makes Yibum, and one who is not a Bechor doesn't make Yibum. Right, it says, and we learn from there that the Torah is saying that doesn't do Yibum. If you're going to argue that only a Bechor could make Yibum, how could a brother born later be a Bechor? Right? So for the fact that the Torah tells us that a brother that's born later doesn't do Yibum, clearly indicates that you don't have to be a Bechor to make Yibum, and therefore when the Torah says Bechor, it just means that the Bechor is Kedima. What do you mean? Maybe the halacha is that a Bechor makes Yibum, but not only a Bechor from the father, maybe even a Bechor from the mother. So what if you had an Eishes Achav Shlahai by Lamai, but this Eishes Achav that was born later happens to be the firstborn to his mother, and maybe that's why you need the meal. It's not logical that the Torah would have to tell us that a Bechor from a mother doesn't count. Why? Because the Yibum b'nachla tala rachmana. We know Yibum is very interconnected with Yarshim. B'nachla min ha'av v'loy min ha'ev. So back to our original thing, since the Torah said that Eshes Acham Shloihai by Lamai is taught from Yibum, is also to do Yibum, obviously it's not exclusive to the Bechor. In fact, the word be'ema ki ikal Bechor t'skayim mitzvah Yibum ki leka Bechor lois t'skayim mitzvah Yibum. Maybe what it's saying is that if there's a Bechor, then anybody could do Yibum. And that's why you need a pasuk to answer Eshes Acham Shloihai by Lamai. But if there's no Bechor at all, then nobody's Mekayim the mitzvah Yibum. Amar Kra, that doesn't either make sense. Because the pashtus of the pasuk is that there's two brothers, umeis echad mahem, and one of the two brothers died. Mi lo yaskinon, the misbechor. What was the case? The case was that the older brother died, because it said umeis echad men. If any one of two brothers died, well, one of these two brothers has to be the bechor. So, and it doesn't specify which brother died, the younger or the older. So even if the older brother died, and the pasuk still says that there's a halacha of Yibum. Correct Gemara, the miscut. Maybe the case is only when the younger brother died. The Amar Achmana liyabim bechor, and only the older brother makes Yibum on the younger brother's wife. So the Gemara, you cannot say that because Amid Rachmana Eishes Achav Shloihaya by Lamai. The fact that the Torah had to say that this particular younger brother is not mechuyev in Yibum, it's a raya that in other cases a younger brother could be mechuyev in Yibum. Correct Gemara be'ema ki leka bechor kadam katan zacha. If there's no bechor, then you don't go basar age. Anyone who does the Yibum Masaycha. But the ika bechor, but if there's actually a bechor, maybe kadam katan lo zacha. Even if the katan did Yibum, it doesn't work. Amar Kra, maybe it's even b'di'evet. Amar Kra, ki yeshu achim yachta. We're comparing all of the brothers to each other. Huksha yeshivas achim zelazeh. And therefore, either one of the brothers, if they do their Yibum, it'll work. When there's a Bechor in the bunch, then lehader agadol. If there's a Bechor in the bunch, even if the Bechor can't do Yibum, you should still try to give it to the oldest of the brothers. But if there's no Bechor at all, maybe ein chayjun eitzel agadol, maybe then you don't care who does Yibum. You only try to get the oldest brother if there was a Bechor. And I'm going to show you that we try to find the oldest brother even if there's no Bechor. Because Allah Matani Abaye Kshisha quoted a brisa that says mitzvah begadol yabim. The oldest should do Yibum. Loi Rotz, if he didn't want to do Yibum, hoilchim eitzel achav akatan. And Rashi says you go to the next brother and to the next brother and to the next brother. So you see that age is a factor even without a bechor. Loy rata then chayjun etzel gado. Zok to Gemara, that's not a raya, because that's not a kasha either. Because kibachar, we treat everybody like a bechor. Ma bechor b'chayrasai garmalai, just like a bechor. The fact that he's a bechor gave him kedima. Af gado gudulasai garmalai. The fact that he was older gives him kedima. And Rashi says very, very nicely. If we look at Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom, Rashi says Hochen etzel achav akatan, mashma katan himenu, the gadol mishayacha. It's mashma that you're always looking for the oldest available brother. Alma madrinon agada. You see that regardless, even if the bechor is not going to do the ibam, you always try to find the oldest brother. The gadol kaidim. When we take a tani, okay, that's not a raya. So then he says, no, everybody is like the bechor, just like the bechor. The bechor, it's not a din in bechor, it's just a din that he's the oldest one. Therefore, we'll say that anyone who's older will have kedim. Maybe that the halacha that the nachla goes al shem achayim, maybe that when we say that the brother who does even gets nachla, maybe that's only if it's the bechor who did even gets nachla. But kibiyabim pashut, that if the bechor didn't do the ibam, maybe lo lishkol nachla, maybe he won't benefit from the nachla of his brother as well. It says yokum al shem achiv. The person who does yibam will take over. So no matter who does yibam takes over. Correct, Gemara. If that's the case, then why did you use the lashon pasuk vaya bechor? It should say vaya gadol. If there's no mila to the fact that he's a bechor, it's just merely a fact that he's older. So be'el bechor the koyer rachmana lamai ilchasar. But it's not a mila of bechora. It's a mila of 8. Now there's no mila that's because he's a bechor. The Gemara wants to say maybe only if there's a bechor, there's kedima. Once we say it's just age related, then it shouldn't have used the word bechor. It should have used the word gadol. So lamai ilchasar. Rashi's lichtov gadol. It could have said the gadol makes even. But if it's bechor, it's much as shaykhs to bechor. Dr. More like Yosy. Actually, it's telling you a very important halacha. But we know the halacha is a bechor takes pishnai. So if there's 2 brothers and one of them is a bechor, you split the Yerusha of their father into 3 chalakim. The bechor gets 2 and the pashat gets 1. What if that happened, and then 10 years later their grandfather dies? So their father died first, and they split it up properly. 10 years later their grandfather dies. Does the bechor now take a double portion from the grandfather? The halacha is no, because he doesn't take pishnayim b'royu kivamuchsa. When they split up the estate at the father's death, whatever is in the estate at that time, the bechor gets pishnayim. But if anything comes to them through their father's estate at a later time, that split 50-50, that's split equal. So zok to Gemara, ma bechor einin noitel b'royu kivamuchsa. Just like a bechor when he arshins, he doesn't take pishnayim from something that comes into the estate later. Af hai, so too, this brother who does ibam, he's not taking the double chelik, but he is getting his brother's chelik. He's getting his brother's chelik. So one pshat is, let's say when his brother dies, his father is still alive, so he will get his brother's chelik. But if his father dies later, he won't get an extra chelik in his father's estate. They just, if there's 5 brothers and now there's 4 brothers, they'll split the father's estate 4 ways. They won't split it 5 ways because of the deceased brother, and he gets that. Because that's called roy. That's how Rashi learns. He will not take his brother's portion if it came later, if it wasn't there at the time. I'm sorry? You would say that he gets it. Correct. But since it says bechor, and we know by bechor there's this rule that he doesn't get pishnayim b'roy kavamachzuk, therefore he doesn't take correct. That's why the Torah used the word bechor. Okay, zok the Mishnah Vayter. Hanitan, there's a machlokes here between Rashi and other Rishonim as to how they learn, but it's already 6:42, so I can't talk about it now. Zok the Gemara Vayter. Hanitan ala shivcha. If somebody he was choshed, they were talking about him that he had a a relationship with a shivcha. I didn't love divrei las. It's not true. It's not true. But people were talking about it, a rumor that he was intimate with a shivcha. Vinishtachra, and then she became free. People were saying that this guy was sleeping around with this shiksa. Vinisgaira, and then she became a giyaris. But it wasn't true. Nevertheless, hareza lo yichmas. He still shouldn't marry her. He still shouldn't marry her. Rashi says lo yisena mishum las. Shelo yomu emasaya hakoil rishon. If he ends up marrying her, everyone's like, you see, it was true. And therefore, even if it's not true, he shouldn't marry. Din kanas. What if he married her against the advice of the Mishnah? Ein maitzin miyada. You don't make him divorce. Hanitn al eishasish. What happens if people were talking about someone who had an illicit relationship with a married woman? V'hoitzi uha mitachas yadot. And Rashi says, Vaitziu means Bezdin made her husband divorce her because of the fact that they suspect that she's also to her husband because she was mezana with this fellow. He's not allowed to marry this woman. And even if he marries this woman afterwards, he has to divorce her. And Rashi says, because the halach is, if someone is mezana with an eshes, she's also labal ulaboil. Sai, her husband, has to divorce her, and Sai, the person who she did the affair with, is also going to be also. Zok to Gemara, hagiyaris miyahav. Let's go back to the first case. She became a giyaris. He's not allowed to marry her. But is her geiris good? Because why was she begayer? Because she wanted this man. So maybe her geiris shouldn't be a kosher geiris either. But you see from the Mishnah that her geiris is kosher, even though she might not have had the right intention. Or a minute, echad ish shenesgayer l'shumisha, the echad ish shenesgayer l'shumish. I'm sorry.
You don't know the whole thing is a rumor. Now you're also
No, because if he marries her, for sure you'll say if he ends up marrying her, I hear. But the halach is a good geir, so you're good. Yeah, but he's still the same person. They'll still say she was making a guy for the wrong reasons. So talk tomorrow. The echadish is guy l'shem ish. The chain mishin is guy l'shem shulchan malachim. What if someone was megayer because she was going to be mishadach with a very powerful person, so she wanted to become Jewish for that? She wanted to marry Jared Kushner, right? What if she only became a geyeris because she wanted to marry Jared Kushner? I'm not saying that, or l'shum avdei shleima, or she wanted to marry someone in royalty. Then einam gerim, they're not gerim. Divrei Rab Nechemia. These are the words of Rab Nechemia. So Rab Nechemia Aimer, echad gerei aroyos. If a ger only became a ger because he was afraid, we say by the kusim, there were lions, they were eating them, they were afraid of the lions, so they were megayer. Vechad ger chaloimos. If someone has a dream, and in his dream he was told to become a ger, that's why he became a ger, but not because he truly wants that. Vechad gerei Mordechai ve'Esther. And Rashi tells us, "V'Rabbi me'amei haaretz misyadim." After the story of Purim, it was powerful to be Jews, and Jews were the most powerful people, and people were afraid of the Jews. So people, when the Jews were in their glory, people were megayer. That's not a good geiris. Einam geirin achi yisgayer ubizman hazeh. They have to be megayer again nowadays. That doesn't make any sense. They're not even around anymore. Ella ema kivizman hazeh. They're only geirim if they're megayer when the Jews aren't in such a great position, when it's not so exciting to be a Jew. If they're megayer, even when there's no ulterior motive to become a Jew, that's when it's a good ger. So how can this woman be a good ger? And for the Gemara, Itmar Allah Amar Abitzak Bar Shmuel Bar Marsha B'Shmei Rav, Halacha Kedivri Aimer Kulam Gerim Heim. We paskin that they're all gerim. For the Gemara, Ihachi Lechatchila Nami. So if they're perfect gerim, so then why can't he marry her? Since they're all kosher gerim, what do we care if people say that she was only megayer to marry him? But it's a good geirus, so let him marry her. It's up to the Gemara, Mishum Rab Asi, Tom Rab Asi, Haser Mincha Ikshus Pet. Remove from yourself, protect from yourself from people talking with a crooked mouth about you. In other words, when people talk bad, they talk about it with a crooked mouth. Velazus Vasayim, and people saying bad about you. No, don't put yourself into a situation where people are going to say that you're a chashuv. Now, there's actually a shaila. What is the bad that we're concerned over here? People might say. There's one shot is that people are going to say, oh, vice because you were taka fooling around with her before. So that's the problem. And there are those who say that it's the problem is that people are going to say that she's not really a good ger because she only did it because she wanted to be with you. Zok to Gemara. So Rashi doesn't say. Rashi says what I said in the first drop. So they're going to say, oh, it must be true that he was fooling around with her before she was nishtacheres or before she was a geres. Taner Rabbanan, ein mekabel ger li Moshe Mashiach. In the times of Mashiach, they're no longer going to accept gerim. Oh, that's part of Avirat and Miksan. But let me tell you something that's a little bit scary. Why aren't we taking gerim in Moshe Mashiach? Because then we're on top. Everyone sees the truth. So the Rishonim tell us for the same reason they're not mekabel tshuva l'Moshe Mashiach. So we must do tshuva before, because just like you're not accepting gerim l'Moshe Mashiach because everyone sees the truth, your tshuva will not be worth anything l'Moshe Mashiach as well. So make sure to do tshuva before Mashiach comes. Additionally, or similarly, like kiblu gerim, like b'mei David, in the times of David, where Klal Yisrael was in their glory, they did not accept gerim. V'loy b'mei Shlomo, Omar Abelazar, Mikra. Where do you see this in the pasuk? Because it says, "Hein gur, yagur." When will we accept gerim? Is efes meusi. When I'm not around, and the Rebbeinu Shalom didn't raise us on a pedestal. Migar itcha, someone who's a ger with you when you're down in the dumps, alecha yipol. Then only such a ger will join our ranks. Someone who wants to be Megayer when it's not glamorous. Aval idach loy, but others you would not accept as ger. Zog to Gemara weiter. Zog to Gemara weiter. Hanit in relationships. Someone he was choshed that he had a relationship with relationships. So the halacha is he's not allowed to marry this woman. Zog Rav, Amar Rav, when is he not allowed to marry this woman? That's Edim. That's only if there were Edim. Rashi says very clearly, Hadatan Yosy zeh hachoshud shekansa. If he married this woman after her husband divorced her, he has to divorce this woman. It's only because Shabo Edim al koila rishon sheruah shezinsa imar. They saw that there was nus here. Now I don't know if they saw mama's nus, but they know for sure it happened. If there's Edim, only then. If it's just a rumor, then we will not make him divorce her. But if there are Adim that gets substantiated, then we don't let him.
The Mishnah uses the word suspect. If there's Adim, that's not suspect.
I know, and Rav is telling us shot in it means with Adim. So you don't like that shot, but look at what Rav Sheshes have to say. Rav Sheshes, Amina, Kinayim V'Shachiv Rav, Amala Shmaitza. So Rav Sheshes made the same comment as Duvi. I think Rav was sleeping when he said this. He wasn't fully conscious because it doesn't make sense what he says. The Tanya, it says in our Mishnah, it's only a suspicion, which is exactly what Duvi mentions. And it also says, and they were moitzi her. So this is a different price. This is a different price than our Mishnah. So we had a chash that someone was being mizana with his relationships. And the husband divorced her. So let's say she was originally married to Shimon. She was originally married to Shimon, and there was a chashad that Reuben was mizana with her. So Shimon was forced to divorce this woman. Shimon divorced her, and then she married Yehuda. She didn't marry Reuben. She was divorced. Or she didn't marry Reuben, who was the object of the chashad. She was divorced from Shimon, and she married Yehuda. She married another brother. And then Yehuda divorced her. Now Reuben wants to marry her. Reuben couldn't marry her right when Shimon divorced her, because he was the one who they were choshed that he had a relationship with her. But after she got divorced from her husband, she married Yehuda, a third party. And now Yehuda divorced her. Now Reuben wants to go marry her. And this guy, Reuben shouldn't have married her, but if Reuben didn't marry her, lo yotzi, we will not force him to divorce her.
Yes.
Yes.
What if the brother died? Is he allowed to be miyavah?
These aren't brothers. Even though they're
Yeah.
named Reuben, Shimon, and
I'm
Levi.
just asking, I'm asking a hypothetical question.
No, we had a shaila. We had a shaila. If a saita for sure you don't do Yevamos. There's questions even of a tsaris saita if you do Yevamos, right? So we had that shaila. There's a machlokes actually. If it's tsaris saita, you do Yevamos. So Zok to Gemara, lo yoitz, he doesn't have to divorce her. Hey chidam, what was the case that you don't have to divorce her? Either Ike Edom, if they were Edom that said that Reuben was Mazana with her, what's the difference? He also acher ba'avzake lakala. If just because she married a third party, she married Yehuda after Shimon divorced her, and that sort of breaks the coil. Why does it break the coil? Because people are going to say, "I'm sorry." You're correct. You're correct. It uses kal because we're still playing with whether Edom or not. But you're 100% right. But if someone else, if Yehuda married her, and that breaks the code, clearly she didn't have a relationship with Reuben because she married Yehuda, my hava. What does it help? There's Edom that says she was insa. Eluleke. That's what usually the word called. Elamai, there was obviously not Edom that she was Mazana with Reuben while she was still married to Shimon. V'taima, and the whole reason why, if Reuben marries her after this whole ordeal, he can keep her, is the asa acher ba'afsa kalakala. It's because since she married Yehuda in between, clearly no one's going to say that she was fooling around with Reuben. Halavachi. But if it wasn't for the fact that there was another factor there, that she married a third party in the middle, which clearly broke the original rumor, Mafkinon, we wouldn't let Reuben stay married to her. So if Shimon just divorced his wife, we wouldn't let Reuben marry her. We only let Reuben marry her because she was married to Yehuda in between. So according to you, Rav, we would let Reuben marry her right away, because according to you, Rav, the only way we prevent Reuben from marrying her is if they were Edom. But if it was just a rumor, you hold we would let her marry her. Rav holds even if there was no Yehuda in between, it would have still been mutter. It would have still been mutter for Reuben to marry her. So why does the Brisa complicate the case and say that she was married to Yehuda in between? Is the Afagab, the also Acher ba'avseke lakala, even though there was a Yehuda in the middle, still lechatchila lo yichnos. He still shouldn't. Reuben still shouldn't marry her lechatchila. With the evidence, of course, he could say married her, but lechatchila he shouldn't. Even though you could say it's not going to make anything look bad because she was married to Yehuda in between. Kamash not. We'll chazer this over because it's already late and the Olam's going. So we'll chazer this over and we'll stop here. Okay, gewaltig. I love that shtickle with the